Welcome to Jackie's Craft Table. Hello everyone. Thanks for joining me. In this video, I'm creating cards with Simon Says Stamp's limited edition card kit for Easter of 2019, and it's called Eggstra Sweet Easter. First, I'm going to show you what's inside this kit. Okay, let's start out with the lollipop that they include in each kit. They included some glossy accents, a cute little bottle of that. This is something I've never tried before. This is Tonic Blue Powder Nouveau Embellishment Mousse. I was really excited about these cute Easter egg dies. They also included a little palette knife for your Nouveau mousse. Here's some cute mini carrots to embellish your cards with, and some little Jellybean sprinkles. I just love those. They included a few envelopes. They're the pretty shimmer envelopes. I just love those. Next up is a sheet of orchid glitter paper from Simon Says Stamp. And this was a lot of fun to play with. This is a stencil that they included. It has so many different shapes on it. It was just fun to decorate the Easter eggs with. And you could use your mousse on this or even your Distress Oxide inks. Next up is their beautiful pattern paper. This is from Echo Park and it's called Easter Wishes. There are so many fun patterns in this little pack. It is double-sided, which makes it very difficult to choose which patterns to use. This is a Jellybean background stamp, 6x6. There's a lot of fabulous things in this kit, but this stamp set was what I was looking forward to playing with the most. It's called Eggstra Sweet Easter, and it's a 6x8 stamp set. I love all of the cute bunny images. And then they always include some beautiful cardstock. This first one's cotton candy, and then banana. This is sea glass and green apple. I don't usually send out Easter cards, but I'm going to this year just because of this beautiful kit. Let's jump right into the first card. Before I snip apart these cute egg dies, I wanted to do a fun technique with them. As you can see, I cut out these dies with lots of different colors of cardstock, and it created these cute little egg frames. I'm going to glue them together on this piece of green apple cardstock. I also cut out the pretty glitter paper. And I'm going to have lots of leftovers so I can make multiples of this design if I want to. And this was just a fun and fast card to put together. That's about it for this card. And then I'm going to stamp out the sentiment with some purple ink. This is from Ranger, and it's called Grape Soda. And I have to stamp that out a few times to get a dark impression. And I'm just stamping that onto a piece of the Nina Solar White cardstock. And then I'm going to fishtail the ends. That's really easy to do. You just cut a slit in the middle and then meet the ends to the slit. I'm adhering this panel to the banana card base. I'm using the Gina K dot liner, and this is a new dot liner that she just put out, and I'm really loving it. It just glides on so smoothly. For the inside of my card, I'm going to stamp another sentiment that says, "You're excellent." And I'm going to use up some of these little Easter egg dies that I had left over and decorate the inside of the card with them. That's just a simple way to use up some of the extra die cuts. I'm putting some foam squares behind my sentiment to prop that up onto the front of my card. And that completes my first card. Here's another look at it and a peek at the inside. For card number 2, I'm using a piece of Stonehenge white colored pencil paper. For this card, I'm going to create my own pattern paper using a lot of the small images that came in this stamp set, as well as this larger image of the chocolate bunny. I'm just stamping that onto the scrap paper just to make it sure it stamps out all right. And I'm using my VersaFine Onyx Black ink. It lays down a nice dark coat of ink on your cards. And usually you don't have to double stamp with this ink. I'm going to speed it up here and stamp out all the cute little Easter eggs and the chicks and the flowers. This card I colored off camera just because it did take me so long. I'm also going to stamp out a teeny tiny sentiment from the set in the extra spaces I have. And it just says peep. I like to include sentiments in the different patterns that I create. I think it adds a lot to it. And here it is all colored in. It's just basic coloring. And I'm going to cut this out with a rounded edge die. I'm also cutting out a piece of the vellum with one of my Easter egg dies. I'm going to run those through my Sizzix Big Shot machine. And here they are, all die cut. They look so cute. And there's a little chick that I didn't catch, so I'm going to hurry and color that in now. I would recommend this paper if you really enjoy coloring with colored pencils. It's really smooth to blend on, and it just grabs the pigment off of your pencils. I'm going to stamp out the sentiment on the Easter egg die cut. I'm using my VersaFine Onyx Black ink again, and I'm going to stamp that up twice so that I can pour over some clear embossing powder. This will just give it a little bit of shine. And I forgot to use my anti-static bag over it first, but since it's clear embossing powder, it doesn't matter too much. You won't see it, see the excess. And I'm just putting it to the paper for just a half a second at a time because I don't want this paper to warp. This vellum paper can warp really easily. And so if you just take your time and go slow, it'll stay flat for you. And that completes it. Everything's nice and melted. And I let that dry for a few seconds so I don't smear it. And I decided it still needed something more. So I'm using a pink Copic marker on the back of this just to give it a little bit of color. It kind of got lost on that busy pattern paper I created. That looks so cute. And I'm going to use another piece of the banana cardstock behind this. And you just see the edges peeking out, but the yellow adds a lot to the card, I think. And now to adhere my sentiment Easter egg, I'm going to use some Gina K Connect glue, and I'm just placing it behind the sentiment so that it doesn't show through the vellum. This is a strong glue, so it will hold it in place just fine with all these little dots. And then I'm just stamping out Happy Easter on the inside of my card. And that completes this card. I also stamped the chocolate Easter bunny again and a few little Easter eggs. Card number 3 is another fast and easy card. I'm stamping out the large sentiment that says, "Hope you have a bunny tail twitching extra amazing Easter." And first I stamp it on a piece of the cotton candy cardstock. Then I'm going to put this pattern paper die cut over it. I just want that to be centered perfectly on this cardstock, because I'm not going to hold it down with the magnet because it will get in the way of the stamping. And then I'm going to stamp right over this Easter egg. And the sentiment is bold enough that you can stamp over this pattern paper and it shows up just fine. It just adds a cute detail. I was thinking of putting a piece of fun foam behind it, but it just didn't look right. So I do end up gluing this Easter egg down flat onto my card panel. And I'm just using some dot runner for that. And I just making sure that I line it up perfectly so that you can read it correctly. I went ahead and die cut the whole sentiment out again with a larger egg die. And this time I am going to put some fun foam behind it. And I'm using some double-sided adhesive to put that together. I didn't get it placed perfectly, so I did come back and trim off the fun foam where you can see it peeking out of the edges. And then I'm using that same plaid pattern paper behind it. And then for the inside, I'm using the other side of that plaid paper just along the bottom. And some of these cute jelly beans. I'm going to have to buy more of these for my stash. They're so darling. And that's all there is to card number 3. On card number 4, I am using a piece of the Desert Storm cardstock from my own stash. I'm doing some mirror stamping on this card. I wanted there to be 2 chocolate bunnies facing each other. It's really easy to do. You just use a solid stamp like I'm placing down here. I pulled out the foam from my mini Misty, and I'm going to stamp that bunny right onto the solid stamp. And I do stamp it up twice to make sure there's a good amount of ink on this stamp. And then I just flip it over and press it down with my fingers. And it just stamps out perfectly. And now I have the mirror image of this bunny stamped on the card. Okay, one is going to be white chocolate. So I'm coloring in this bunny with a cream-colored polychromos pencil. And the shadows are going to be a darker yellow. And my other bunny is going to be a milk chocolate. 2 of my favorite chocolates. I don't care much for dark chocolate, but I do really like the milk chocolate and white chocolate. And then I just come in with a darker brown on this milk chocolate bunny to color in some shadows. It's really fun to color on this Desert Storm cardstock. Really makes the images pop, I think. I'm stamping out the sentiment below my bunnies. It says, "Have a sweet Easter," and I think it just went perfectly with these little chocolate bunnies. And I'm using my VersaFine Onyx Black ink again for that. I decided to die cut these images with an oval die. And then I chose another piece of the cute pattern paper from this kit to adhere it to. I'm going to prop up my bunnies with a piece of fun foam. I'm just using some more double-sided adhesive to adhere that. And then I can just center that on this piece of pink pattern paper. And then I thought it needed something more, and so I'm putting some green ribbon on this card. I just use another piece of 1/4 inch double-sided adhesive behind this ribbon to attach it under the bunnies. And then I can just flip it over and add more adhesive on the back to keep this ribbon in place. I've had this ribbon in my stash for a long time. I think it's my favorite because I use it so much, but I'm almost out of it. I don't know how I'm going to get my hands on some more of this, but it's just the perfect soft Easter green ribbon. And then I put several glue dots behind it. And I can trim down the ends of this bow. I come in with even more glue dots. I just don't want this bow shifting in the mail. Now I can adhere this to my card base. And I chose to use a white card base for this. I really love how this one turned out. It's fun to do the mirror image stamping. Give it a try if you haven't tried it before. I want to be able to stack my sentiment for this next card. So I'm cutting my sentiment in half, and it's easy to put back together again if you want to stamp it side by side. But I wanted it to fit on this little Easter die cut. And it just says Easter Wishes. And I'm going to stamp that out with some Ranger Orange Puff ink. Or is it called Cheese Puff? Yeah, Cheese Puff ink. They come up with some really fun names for the inks and the cardstocks. I just love it. This piece of orange stripe pattern paper is probably my favorite from the whole pad. I love a nice striped pattern paper. So I'm using that on half of my card base, which is made out of the green apple cardstock. And then I simply stacked 2 of the Easter egg die cuts together, and I'm centering that on my card. How is that for a fast and easy but cute card? I'm going to use some of the leftover paper strips to decorate the inside of this card. That orange stripe is just so cute. I want to get more of that. And then another stripe of the cute flower pattern paper right next to it. I'm using my long scissors to snip off the excess. Just easy to cut in a straight line with these scissors. And then I decided it needed something more, so I'm using my corner chomper to chomp the sides of this. And that completes this card. Okay, for my next card, I'm pulling out the tonic mousse, and I've already die cut several of the Easter eggs. To make it go faster, I'm just trying to put all of them under this stencil, and I put a little bit of tape behind them to hold them in place. And then I'm taping the stencil down good with some purple tape. This is the first time I've ever used this mousse, like I said before. And it's very stiff. You kind of have to work it out, kind of churn it up. And then you can just scrape it along the stencil. And I was afraid it was getting under the stencil, but it worked out well. And it's kind of like a butter consistency that's not completely room temperature yet. It's still kind of stiff. But it was fun to try. It's such a pretty shimmery color. And then I take that stencil to my sink right away and rinse it off, as well as the palette knife. Look how gorgeous those Easter eggs turn out. And then I'm just scraping off the excess from the sides of these eggs. I really love that green one. I think that one's my favorite. My sentiment is going to be Easter Wishes again. And I'm using the piece, this is from the pattern paper pack, and it's just a plain pink paper. And I'm stamping out the sentiment with some black ink. And then I can attach it to a piece of cotton candy cardstock. I'm just going to place these Easter eggs around the sentiment. And I'm not using all of the stenciled eggs, but just a few. I also wanted to add a piece of pattern paper and a piece of the purple glitter paper. That blue powder mousse is just stunning in real life. It's so pretty. And then I used another egg and another strip of paper on the inside. On my next card, I'm going to be doing a bit of watercoloring. I wanted to color in this little bunny that's painting Easter eggs. It's one of my favorite images. It's so cute. And I'm also using that piece of pattern paper you see at the top left. It really looks like paint spatters to me, so I thought it would be perfect for this little card with the artist bunny painting his eggs. I'm stamping this image onto a piece of hot pressed watercolor paper. I've been playing with this paper for a few months. I usually use the cold pressed, which is a lot more rough and a lot thicker. And I find that I like this hot pressed paper because it is so smooth and a lot thinner. It doesn't take as much water abuse, but I really like the results. I'm pouring over some clear embossing powder. I forgot to use my embossing anti-static bag again. Since it's clear, it's okay. And I'm being very careful to melt him without warping the paper. When you're watercoloring, it's helpful to use embossed images because it contains all of the paint and they won't bleed into each other, especially if you want to get a card done fast. You don't have to wait for things to dry. I'm using my little palette of pastel Prima watercolors. Using a water brush like this that contains water in the tube makes it go faster because you don't have to keep dipping your brush into a little bowl of water, and you can just clean it off by wiping it on a tissue or a paper towel or whatever you have. That makes it go really fast. The bunny I'm going to keep white, and so I'm just using a little bit of gray I had on my palette just to add in some shadows. And to make him look even more white, I'm going to put a blue sky around him. And I'm also going to add grass under his little feet and the eggs. I'm using a bigger brush for this, just so I don't get any harsh lines. This goes faster with a bigger brush. I used one of the Easter egg dies to cut out an egg in the pattern paper. And I'm just making sure I cover it so that you don't see any of the white of the paper. I'm also painting around the edges of this card. And then I'm going to put that aside to dry. I'm hitting it with my heat tool just to make this process a little bit faster. The paint does make it warp a little bit. I'm going to flatten that down with some of this dot liner, and I'll attach that to a white card base. The pattern paper I propped up with some foam tape, just to make the window a little more noticeable. Now I can just pull off the release paper and attach that to the front of my card. The pattern papers in this card kit were just exceptional. They were really fun. The sentiment, I'm using the teeny tiny sentiment that says Happy Easter, and I heat embossed that onto a piece of black cardstock. I'm using a little bit of foam tape behind this as well as a little bit of Gina K Connect glue, so it's the same level as the pattern paper. Just trying to get that on evenly. And that completes this card. On the inside, I just decorated it simply with another strip of the pattern paper. On my next two cards, I'm going to be using this Jellybean cling stamp. And I'm just positioning my paper in the center of this. I'm going to use some more Ranger ink for this. Since it is a new stamp, I have to ink it up several times. I didn't tape down my white paper. I'm just remembering where it is on the grid of the paper inside my MISTI. I had a hard time deciding which color of ink to use on this cute stamp. The first time I tried it, I used multiple colors of Distress Oxide inks, but it looked too muddy and I didn't like the result of that. So I decided just to stamp it in my favorite color of Jellybean, which is Pear Tart. So for my first background, I'm using Ranger's Electric Lime. And my husband's favorite flavor of Jellybean is popcorn, so I decided to use Lemon Twist ink on the second one. I cut both of these panels down so that they'd be a little bit smaller than an A2 sized card, and I'm using up some scrap paper. All I needed was the very edge of these colored cardstocks to show as a mat behind these jelly beans. And I did use them to cut out some of the Easter eggs, but it worked just fine, and I love using up scrap paper. This made me happy. I'm attaching it to a white card base, and I'm having fun with some more of the beautiful pattern paper from this kit, as well as some of the cut aparts. This one just simply says Easter, and then I'm going to add a few of the jelly bean sprinkles. I just want those going down the side of this card. The stickers are so small, I'm just using my penknife here to position it. Now my craft pick. And I think that looks really cute. But it's not complete yet, but I'm going to move on to the second background. And I'm using the yellow cardstock to mat this one. And I'm also going to add it to a white card base. I think I used up every scrap of this orange striped pattern paper. I just love it. And then I'm going to attach that to the center of this card. I thought that these two cards looked a little plain, and so I wanted to add a little more pizzazz to them. I'm using my ink pads that I used to stamp out the jelly bean stamp, and I'm just swiping it down a piece of white cardstock. I'm going to cut out some cute little scallops. These are some Lawn Fawn dies I've had in my stash for a while. These cards just seemed a little too plain. So I'm going to use my craft pick here and pull these out of the dies and pop out the little circles. So there's the green, and it matches perfectly with the jelly beans. And the yellow, I'm just going to put some scallops at the top and the bottom of the pink cardstock. And I already glued down the green scallop on the left side of my green jelly bean card. Then I wanted to add a few more jelly beans to this card. And that just spruced up these cards a lot, I think. And here are the two completed cards. The inside I just used leftover strips of paper. I really like the sentiment on this green card. It just says Easter wishes. And those are two fun and fast cards to put together. On my last card, I'm using one of the leftover Easter egg frames, and I thought I'd make an Easter egg wreath with this. I'm using the last of my blue cardstock for this card base, and I'm using a lot of little Easter eggs. I used the smallest egg die to cut out the various pattern papers and cardstocks, and behind each I put a foam square. Now I'm just arranging these around the wreath base. I'm pulling out another piece of the yellow cardstock to stamp my sentiment onto, and I'm using the sentiment that just says Happy Easter. I'm stamping the sentiment up with some VersaFine Onyx black ink. I thought about using another colored ink, but I thought this time I'd just keep it simple since the eggs are so colorful. And I'm going to cut this out into a strip so that I can fishtail the ends. And I'm going to put this right in the center of this little wreath. I think that looks so cute. I'm going to use another square foam piece here in the center of it. And then on the edges, to attach it to the eggs, I'm just going to use a little bit of Gina K Connect glue. I forget to take the release paper off of that square foam, but I remember here at the last second and pull it up and take off that paper. And then it adheres much better. Another very simple card, but very pretty, I think. And I'm going to lay my acrylic block over that to hold it in place until it dries. I'm going to chomp just 2 of the corners of this card to soften the edges a little bit. On the inside, I'm going to use more scraps left over. Another little Easter egg frame. On the inside, I also stamped the sentiment that says, "You're excellent," and a little flower. I think that looks so cute. Well, I created 10 cards with this kit, and I didn't get to even half of the stamps and the supplies that it came with. But I had a blast playing with this fabulous kit. And I hope you were all inspired by some of these cards and get a chance today to sit down and create something awesome. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you all have a very happy Easter, my crafty friends. Bye.